Hello, good evening, and welcome back to our fall Bible study, Believe in Me, Jesus in the Gospel of John. And today we are in, finally, the second half of the book of John, sometimes called the Book of Glory, or sometimes called the Book of the Private Ministry, because this is a time where Jesus really is with his disciples and teaches his disciples in the section of the book leading up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. So today we're in chapters 12 and 13, which open this second half for Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem and Jesus washing the disciples' feet. But before we start that, let's think back to 2 weeks ago and review I think 3 weeks ago, and review our previous lesson on Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So, do you have anything that stood out to you about that lesson, or any takeaways that you remember, or anything you want to talk about?
Well, this was the pivotal moment for when the Jews that are in power are now okay, he's got to go.
He has got to go.
They're
Yeah.
plotting for his death, and he waits purposely for Lazarus to die and for certain people to be there to witness it in order for this to happen.
Yeah, I don't know. We talked about how many more witnesses there would be once Lazarus was dead, but I think that's a great point, right? So, we talked about that odd phrasing of Jesus loved Lazarus and the sister, so he stayed where he was. And we talked about, okay, Jesus waited for Lazarus to die, and like you said, for those other people to arrive, so out of love for all of them and for all of us, so that he could perform the greater miracle. And this is the miracle that provides what literary we would call like a point of no return. It definitely like locks in his path to death on the cross because of the repercussions of this miracle. It changes them from like, let's just pick up a stone and throw it to him, to let's make a plan. We got to get rid of this guy. Yeah. Great points. What else?
You saw how angry Jesus was, or sorrowful for the people, the people that lost Lazarus and the pain that they're going through and the fact that they have to go through death and just the being scared and the turmoil and all of that.
Yeah, Jesus weeps. I mean, we see his sorrow, but we see that he becomes troubled, and those make sense to us. But then we also see that he becomes angry, and that is so puzzling that our translators often don't even translate it. They might translate it to like he to being troubled or something more similar to that, but it's a word for anger, and he Jesus is about to confront sin and death, the power of evil that leads to sin and death, to the point of his own death. And so we see that he is angry at what sin and sorrow and death and grief do to us. And that is part of the reason that he is willing to die. And we saw that sort of emotional scene at the tomb depicting all of that. Yeah. And then we get that great statement that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and he becomes the resurrection and the life for all of us, not just for Lazarus, but for every one of us through his actions here. And we saw Martha's great confession. Martha, she really shines in her identity here in John as a faithful disciple, and one who confesses the nature of Jesus Christ as the Son of God and he who comes into the world. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else stand out about Lazarus and that whole sequence?
That was very interesting, because when he said, let's go back to Judea, they were like, but then they were going to stone him. But then Jesus said, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees the world by light. But when he walks at night, he stumbles because he has no light. And
Yeah.
then Thomas, doubting Thomas, he even said, let's go that we may die with him.
Yeah. Yeah. That contrast. Thomas is ready to commit here. He is willing to go to die with Jesus. They know that the danger is real. They know how serious it is, and this idea that um, that someone it's not time yet. Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the light, he doesn't stumble. It's not Jesus' time yet, but it's figuratively 12 hours away, right? It's coming, right? That foreshadowing. Yeah, great points. What else? Anything else? Okay, well, let's get into today's passage. We are picking up in 12:12, but let's do a little run through some notes, like interesting setup notes from the end of chapter 11 and the beginning of chapter 12. So at the end of chapter 11, we went through 55 or 53. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. So we know that the Jewish authorities are now, they're going from I hate that guy to like a scheme, right? So Jesus goes, he says he no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went there to the country. So Jesus goes out into the country, and it says to the wilderness into a city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. And it seems like he may have had local disciples there in this country town of Ephraim, in the wilderness where he is staying. And this is a place that he is, people believe in him there, right? He's back to a place where people believe in him, but the Passover time comes, and many of the people who believe go up to Jerusalem. And so we're seeing the setup of like the clashing crowds are building, right? Because we know that there were those who were in Jerusalem who are opposed to Jesus, who come out to Bethany and go back to Jerusalem. And then we have like these crowds from other places that are believers in Jesus, and they go to Ephraim. And so we really have the setup of these mixed crowds building there. And at the beginning of chapter 12, Jesus returns to Bethany where he is given a dinner. And it says they made him a dinner. So he is the guest of honor. This is a dinner that is for Jesus. And there Mary takes the costly perfume and anoints Jesus. And so when we read this in order, we get the understanding that this is a dinner in honor of Jesus in celebration of Lazarus' new life. And so the miracle of Lazarus continues, it has its ripple effect on either side. Here it is with the joy and gratitude of Mary and Martha, and this anointing is out of it, is a response to that. Jesus also says that it's in preparation for his burial. So we understand that we are in the latter half where we're looking at the path to the cross. And then if you look at chapter 12, verses 9 through 11, we see a large crowd of the Jews comes back to Bethany, right? And we know these are crowds spilled over from Jerusalem, and we know that those crowds always have believers and people who are in opposition to Jesus in them, right? And they come because they want to see Lazarus alive with their own life, with their own eyes. And that that causes the chief priest to make another plan. Look at verse 10. What is the other part of their plan that they're going to do?
They're gonna kill Lazarus.
Yeah. They say we've got to kill him too. Him just walking around alive as a witness to the power of Jesus is ruining everything. Right? So they are going to kill Lazarus. Okay, so would someone please read 12 verses 12 through 19?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
The next day, a large crowd that had come to the feast heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, crying out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. And Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, just as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. The crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to bear witness. The reason why the crowd went to meet him was that they heard he had done this sign. So the Pharisees said to one another, You see that you are gaining nothing. Look, the world has gone after him.
Okay, thank you. All right, a crowd finds out that Jesus is going to continue on to Jerusalem, right? He's been in he went from Ephraim, he went to Bethany, now he's going to continue on into Jerusalem. And so they prepare an entry for him. What is that entry like?
You've got palms, and he's on the donkey fulfilling a prophecy.
Yeah. So the palm branches, John is the only gospel that mentions the palm branches, and this is how we get Palm Sunday, and this is why the palm branches are a part of that of the Christian calendar and that celebration for Palm Sunday. And the palm branches were used in the victory procession in the uprising of the Maccabees. So this is a group that briefly took back Jewish independence in the century before Jesus. So just in that pre-New Testament, they were able to rise up and take back their temple and reconsecrate it after it had been desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes. And all of that is kind of the focus of a ongoing, sometimes violent nationalism by the Jews who want to gain their freedom from Rome. They've been under a sequence of outside powers for hundreds of years now. And the Maccabean victory was like the spot when they weren't, right? Like that was the bright spot. And so constantly there's this sense of can we get our freedom back? Can we get our independence back? And so palm branches are bringing in that messianic hope for a worldly victory, right? And then you mentioned the donkey's colt. So what is the significance of this young donkey or donkey's colt?
Well, a colt is a donkey that has never been ridden. It is, I don't know, holy or unsoiled.
There's
That
there's like a symbolic thing here, right? Judy, were you going to say something? Did I miss it? Okay. Well, so this is we John as narrator gives us that this is a fulfillment of prophecy, right? From Zechariah, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. So this is, the onlookers are looking at this, and this looks messianic to them. This is also just like so when remember, David is the quintessential king of ancient Israel. And when David is nearing the end of his life, all of his sons like want the throne, and there's several uprisings. There's Absalom. There's all these, but David designates Solomon as his heir. And the way that he does that is David puts Solomon on his mule to ride into, on the king's mule to ride into the city to indicate that he is a legitimate heir. So there's a sense here of like, oh, David's rightful heir coming into the city. And really, and also, so they're singing, right? The Halal, the Psalms 113 to 118, these are traditionally sung in Jerusalem, in procession to Jerusalem for Passover, but they make it about Jesus, right? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're talking about, they're not just saying that. That's not just a thing. It's a thing about Jesus. Hosanna is saved now. And they're making it about Jesus. And really, this whole thing looks like an ancient procession that you would get for a king returning into the city after being victorious in battle. So this is setting up Jesus. This is the opening of kind of the image of Jesus as king that will suffuse the later part of the passion narrative where Jesus is talked about as king. But that opens right here where Jesus looks like a king coming into the city. And, they had to get some stuff ready to do this thing. Why? What kicked it off, right? There are people in Jerusalem who are hyped on Jesus. Why are they hyped on Jesus?
Hyped in a good way or a bad way?
Well, I think let's talk about it in a good way first.
Well, in a good way, you're hearing that Lazarus was raised by Jesus, and could this be the savior? All of that. On the bad side, or the not good for Jesus side, you've got the Pharisees going, this guy is too much, and he's turning everything upside down, and we got to off him.
Yeah.
Got
Yeah.
these
So
two
this can,
climaxing ideals coming together.
yeah, it continues to be the domino effect of Lazarus raising, right? The joy and belief that resulted from Lazarus overflow in this celebration of Jesus as coming king. And then we get again this opposition. Here it says, before it was the chief priests, here it's the Pharisees. They got to kill Lazarus because, the world has gone after him. And that, the funny, this is a line that has a lot of dramatic irony, isn't it? Because for them, when they say it, that's a bad thing, right? It's the problem statement. The world has gone after him. But for the reader, the world going after him is the mission statement, right? This is the very purpose of the testimony that is written here as the book of John. And so the world going after him becomes this kind of hinge point, or this kind of loaded situation. Yeah. Other comments?
Back on the palms for a minute. I think in a different Bible study, you had said the palms come from a different region. Is that correct?
There may be, yes, and I did not. There was the approach from Jericho is what I'm remembering. I didn't go back and look that up, so I do not remember. But we did talk about that, and I remember us talking about that. And like maybe
Yeah.
they bring them in because they were used in these Maccabean victories. I'm not sure how those fit together.
Okay, I was just curious about
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
Mhm.
Remembering stuff from other studies. It's very good. Other thoughts on this section? Well, let's read 20 through 26. Would someone read that?
I can.
Okay, thank you.
And there were certain Greeks among them that came up and worshiped the feast. The same came from Philippi, which was Pisidia of Galilee and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. Philip cometh and telleth Andrew, and again Andrew and Philip told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come that the Son of Man be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn wheat falleth into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth this world shall keep it into eternal life. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there you may also be my servant. If any man serves him, well, my Father will be honored.
Okay, thank you. All right, um, so there's some Greeks, right? What is the connection between verse 20? There's some Greeks who are going up to worship and verse 19.
They were trying to trick him.
Do you think so? I think well, I guess we don't know, but I think this is presented that like maybe the Pharisees are setting him up. The Pharisees do try to set him up in the synoptics all the time, but I think these Greeks might just sincerely want to talk to Jesus. I don't know. What do y'all think?
I mean, you have all these people that are not Jews that he's been ministering to all along, and that's a really new thing to hear for both Gentiles and Jews. So the
Yeah.
fact that it's saying that they're coming to worship, maybe they've heard him before, and these are believers coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if they're coming, so these Greeks who are coming to worship at the feast were probably proselytes, Greeks who had interest in the God of Israel or were believers in the God of Israel. And yeah, they've heard the word about Lazarus. They've maybe heard Jesus teaching and preaching on his previous times in Jerusalem, and they want to see Jesus. And we see like the whole world has gone after him. And then immediately, yeah, here's some Greeks who are going after him. So we get kind of this example of the start of the whole world immediately after this dismay. Oh, the whole world has gone after him. And indeed they are. And I get kind of bummed that we don't get to see the outcome of their request to see Jesus, right? Like John doesn't really tell us. Jesus just starts teaching, and we don't know. Does Jesus meet with him after that? Is he saying no, or do we just not see Jesus meeting with them? But Jesus starts teaching, and starting in verse 23, like what is Jesus saying?
The hour
The hour is coming
Yeah, the hour has come for what?
for God to be glorified.
Yeah, to be glorified. And what do we think the being glorified means? Meaning what?
He's going to be with the Father.
Okay. What else? Bethany, you're muted.
is this him prophesying this is the hour has come? He's recognizing that he's about to be taken, he's about to be put on the cross, which is the all glory moment, isn't it, when he is crucified?
Yeah, yeah. John really, we think of glorification as maybe the resurrection, but in John, it's really the crucifixion. The hour to be glorified is the hour of Jesus being lifted up on the cross. And we see that here. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. So we get immediately this conversation about a death that gives birth to new life. And so, that's how we know we're talking about the cross. That's how we know that what Jesus means to be glorified. And in John, that's what he means every single time. So we could stack those up together and see that pattern. And here it is here, the grain of wheat that falls from the ground. Now it may be that Jesus's answer means that Jesus does not yet meet with the Greeks because he must first be glorified before he can draw all men, to himself. That's from another part of the passage. That's not from this line, but just this idea that is is the message for the whole world yet, or does Jesus need to be glorified first? And so that may be an answer, or it may be that Jesus teaches instead, and then he meets with the Greeks separately. That's hard to tell. Look at verse 25. What does verse 25 mean? He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. How do y'all take that?
Uh, I've always kind of read that as, if you like the status quo, you're enjoying things as they are right now, then you're kind of missing it. You don't have eternal life. And if you can see the sin, if you can see the wrongs, if you can sorrow over what's not working in God's plan.
Yeah. And that may be part of the life of discipleship is being able to see um, who, what's wrong, the effects of sin and death in the world. And this idea if anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be. Well, where is Jesus? Jesus is on the road to the cross. And so where he is, his servant will be. So this is a discipleship passage, right? Someone, a follower for Jesus, should expect the same outcome as Jesus, the same treatment as Jesus. We get this message several times as we go through the coming teaching sections where Jesus says, like, a servant's not greater than his master. That one comes up. There's several times where he says, like, when you follow me, you will suffer like I suffer. And following Jesus means following him into the suffering and death, into self giving love, into sacrifice, because that's where Jesus is going. And it's that pairing where Jesus talks about his death and then immediately begins to talk about discipleship that is, the message for followers, right? Any other comments or questions on this passage, on this
Yeah, I
part of
was
it?
just, yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, I think that, like someone who loves their life doesn't want to die, right? Like they want to stay here. They want to have long life, and please don't ever take it from me. But someone who hates their lives in this world wants to be with God in heaven, right? Like that is so much more important than life here on earth, which is hard because you have people in this world you love that you don't want to leave,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I don't
But
want to leave. I'm not ready to
right,
die. Yeah.
right. But he's calling us to say whatever is here on earth pales in comparison to what is awaiting us in death.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's some hyperbole here with the word hate, right? This doesn't mean that we should, you know, make ourselves miserable or that we should, this is an invitation to self harm. It's not, it's this is a poetic way of saying that our priorities have to be on following Jesus, and it will be costly. Oh, yeah, yeah. And sometimes it looks like not pursuing the things that this life invites us to pursue, right? It's not the most comfortable being a follower of Jesus. We have different priorities. Yeah. Oh, good. What else? Anything? Well, let's look at 13. We're going to skip the next little passage, although there's some really good stuff in it. Here is where it's, if I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself, is in verse 32. And when there are people who don't believe, John actually says that when Isaiah, okay, way back Isaiah, right? We're talking hundreds of years before. Remember that Isaiah had a call where Isaiah had a vision of God's glory in the throne room of heaven. John tells us that was Jesus' glory too. It looks like from reading John that Jesus was there and Isaiah saw his glory. So a fascinating passage, but we're going to move to 13, 1 through 4. Would someone read just those first four verses?
Sure.
Thanks.
It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already promised Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist.
Okay, thank you. So these four verses provide an introduction and a summary for the chapter that will come, right? This is our little intro paragraph. What do you notice about it?
Just that he's preparing for the end. He's
Yeah, this is
he's
he's filled
grieving
with
the ones
purpose.
that he's leaving, that he loves, but recognizing and outwardly letting others know that this is the end.
Yeah, there's a sense of purpose here, and that the motivation behind it is love, right? So yeah, Jesus is headed for, he's been on the road to the cross. We know that, and that's highlighted. Yeah, what else?
Well, doesn't it set the stage like when and where and timing, who may have been there?
Yeah, so before it says it's before the feast of the Passover. Now, the NLT and the NIV add just before, but there's no just before. It's just before, right? And so scholars debate whether this meal is actually the same meal that the synoptics use, that the at which the synoptics describe the institution of the Lord's Supper. So when Jesus took the cup of bread and said, "Do this in remembrance of me." Well, is this the same meal? Because this says it's before the feast of the Passover. So it may be an earlier meal. And way down in verse 29, which we haven't gotten to, the rest of the disciples think that Judas is going out to buy things we need for the feast. So they're still expecting another feast later. So this may not be the same meal, and yet in the action in John, they go out, and after they go out from this meal, there's no more action. Jesus teaches for like 5 chapters. Is it 5? He teaches for 14, 15, 16, and 17. 4 chapters. It teaches for 4 chapters, and then it's immediately Judas's betrayal. And so it's hard to line up the timing of what's happening when, but this may be a completely separate meal, and we don't get like your Bible may be like mine. Mine titles this section the Lord's Supper, but we do not get an institution of the Lord's Supper, and this may not be the same meal. And we also don't, we know that Jesus is with his disciples. We don't know that that's just the 12. And so that's why, some people think that in this time, the John the Elder is another. So we have been talking as if John the Apostle is the author of this book, which is a perfectly good possibility. The other possibility is John the Elder, a different John. And if that's the case, then this is the time when we have these extra disciples there and they are with Jesus. It looks, they don't tell us that this is like, we don't get the setup for the upper room like we do in the synoptics. You may remember Jesus says there's going to be an upper room. We're going to be able to eat the feast there. Go find a man carrying a jar of water on a head. Follow him and he'll lead you to this room. Like, we don't get that, but it does seem that they now have this private space of the upper room, and that's where they are going. And partially because it seems like there's no servants there. He didn't go to somebody's house and join them who provided servants. There's a noticeable lack of servants who do things like washing feet. So there's a a lack of that task here that sets up the whole section. We also notice that it's linked to what? What's the other thing that it talks about in verse 2?
It's saying that already in Judas's heart, Satan has put the
Yeah.
intention to betray Jesus.
Yeah, everything in this section, we will get Jesus's actions and Jesus' teaching, and then it will immediately link it to Judas' betrayal, right? These go hand in hand. So watch for this pattern. Each time something happens, it leads to an acknowledgement of the upcoming betrayal. And we have to say, like, okay, how is the foot washing connected to the betrayal? I think it's connected in time and action, but John seems to be connecting it theologically. So let's keep that question in mind as we go through the section. What does Jesus' foot washing have to do with Judas' betrayal? What is the link here? So we'll come back to that question. Would someone read 13:5 through 17?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Judy.
Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash your feet, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, Do not my feet, Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should also do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them."
Thank you. Okay, so um, So, we assume that they're in maybe the upper room that we see from the synoptics. It doesn't see that there are any servants. So they have come in, right? They're supposed to go to the table. At formal Roman dinners, people would recline at a low table. In this position, put their feet next to other diners, right? And this position was optional for Jewish dinners, but required for the Passover. And so we see here they are reclining at the table. It's mentioned in verse 12 and 23. So their dirty feet are like, kind of in other people's faces, and they must not have had their feet washed because there's no servant there. And foot washing is a normal part of life, but it's done by a lower rank person. Now, why do you suppose that one of the disciples doesn't look around and say, hey, I think I should do this job and take up the job to wash everyone's feet? What do you think?
I think probably because they thought it was gross.
Yeah, I mean, and it wouldn't,
At some
it was
level.
normal enough, right? It was like for us, it would be like a very unusual situation, right? But for them, this would be a daily situation anytime they would go in places where there would be servants.
There,
Yeah, what else?
Could it be also that they were just with each other all the time, so they just didn't really even, I don't know, take time to do that, even though it is normal?
Maybe.
I don't know.
You've also had this rivalry with all the disciples on who is on top, who's the most righteous or the best follower. So for any of them to be running and cleaning everybody's feet, wouldn't that put them at the bottom of that pyramid?
Yeah, Luke tells us about multiple arguments, one of them even at the final meal about who's the greatest. So this is, at least during this time period, they are often busy arguing about who's the greatest. And so probably they're busy thinking that so and so should, that guy's the youngest. That guy was a tax collector. I think one of them should do this is a lowly job. And they don't want to do the lowly jobs, right? Why do you think Jesus takes up this job?
Because Jesus is a servant. He wanted to show them because they did a lot of walking. When you do a lot of walking like that, your feet will be filthy. But Jesus wanted to serve them.
Yeah, so they had dirty feet. I think you're right in the sense of like it just needed done. And he wasn't too good to do it. And sometimes that's why we do something. It's just because it needs done, right? And I also, as an antidote to their misplaced concern for who's the greatest, their little rivalry or bickering or however you want to call it. Why is Peter so resistant?
He's probably mortified.
Yeah, I think
And,
so.
and then he's like, well, clean everything.
Yeah,
When Jesus is
there's
like,
some comic relief in this scene with Peter, isn't there?
But did Peter offer to wash their feet?
What's that?
But he doesn't offer to do it, right?
Right. He doesn't say,
Like,
"Hey,
oh
let
no,
me
no,
do
you
that."
shouldn't do it. Let me do it. He doesn't do that.
Great point. I wonder if he wasn't embarrassed that he didn't offer, but then also to your point, it makes me wonder if he was busy thinking, well, John should do it, he's the youngest, Levi should do it, if he's busy pointing fingers at who else should do it, because it was normal for a rabbi's disciple to wash a rabbi's feet. It just wasn't normal the other way around. And so he's like, well, I'm head disciple. Why should I, I'm one of the three closest to Jesus. Someone else should ought. So there's some speculation there, but definitely Peter's got a lot of, he's got emotions going on because he's like, no, yes, more, so very, very Peterish. Yeah, it it endears him to me. I find it relatable.
I think Jesus in this moment is, he's about to do something far worse than clean a bunch of really dirty feet. And he's trying to, in a really caring, gentle, and physical way, show them how they can serve one another and others.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, okay, yeah, this is so much better than going to the cross, right?
Right?
If you had your
Yeah.
choice, you would
Yeah.
definitely just do this, right?
And he's,
Um,
and he's sorrowful. He's gonna miss them. These are his last moments, and to just have that physical service that doesn't cause him any pain, that can actually give him and them joy when the next time he's doing the service, it's gonna be all pain and shame and
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think you make a really great point, in that his love for them is really showing, right? And this tells us something about, what it means to be God and King, right? God, the nature of God is that God is always godly, right? God never does anything that is outside God's character. Everything that God does is within God's character because God is consistent, right? We are inconsistent. When we sin, we go like, "Oh, that's not who I am," right? Like that's a lot of the times when we do something wrong, we hurt somebody, we go like, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. But God is always who God is. And so, what this tells us is that God is a servant, God is humble. And it's totally fitting for, this is not, Jesus is the exception to God as a whole. The character of Jesus is the same as the character of the Father. And so when we look at it, we see, well, I have a whole Old Testament of God continuing to pursue people who hated him and disobeyed him and left him. And God continues to pursue. God is humble enough to continue to want to dwell with man when man, um, turns away. And so this is all part of the actual character of God, not a moment that is outside God's character where God does a thing and says, you should be like this. But this is actually the nature of God, the do the lowly job, to be the servant. Yeah. Well, how does Jesus interpret it? What was Jesus' instruction, to them about it, like, starting in verse 14?
Do it also
Yeah.
to each other.
you
You should
serve
do.
it.
So is this literal? Should we be washing each other's feet? I mean, Jesus specifically said the words, you should wash one another's feet. So directly command from Jesus. Should we be doing this? Do you guys do this? What do you guys think?
We should be in service to one another at any capacity that we need.
Okay.
That's the message.
Yeah.
I mean,
So you go
I
ahead.
think also, that was that culture's way of showing, right? That, you're not better than me and I'm not, or I'm not better than you or whatever. So that having that attitude, right? That
Yeah.
I will do the hard things for you, the things that are not fun or, easy, that's how I show that, I value you and that you are loved.
Yeah. Yeah. He chose something that was normal and happened every day, but that would not normally be his role to say, hey, I do the lowly jobs, right? What are some equivalents of foot washing? What would you put in this category in our culture?
So all I keep thinking about for those in scouts is servant leadership. And when the kid has to be the quartermaster and come up with the rules, but then some kiddo doesn't want to do the dishes. And instead of yelling at the kid to do the dishes, just go show the kid and do the dishes next to the kid, or do the dishes. Like, that's always what's been running through my head for all of this, because we always talk about servant leadership in scouts, and there's nothing lowly. Like, everybody chips in, everybody helps out. So all I'm thinking about in this is all the times I've heard in some board of review or something about, well, I just had to do it because nobody else, like, the menial task is still, it has to be done, and it should be done for the greater of the group.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I think that we recognize maturity and immaturity in those situations, don't we?
Yeah, that they're mature when they go ahead and will lead from behind or lead from the secondary,
Mm.
or not say that's too lowly of me, I can't do it. So no, that's a
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, great point. What else? What's the equivalent of foot washing? What else?
I mean, how many jobs out there are shameful, right? Or not shameful, but just everybody kind of, oh,
Undesirable.
you're the janitor, you're the garbage man, you're you're cleaning up all my mess.
Yeah. Anytime there's somebody else's mess, right?
Yeah.
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 I always think of the person like at the front of the cafeteria, like taking the tray and like scraping all the food leavings off of it. It's like, oh, that's not a desirable job. That feels like a lowly job. And then there's also all those jobs. I think you touched on this where it feels like I'm cleaning up after somebody else, and to do those, that's those are lowly. That's undesirable. So, yeah, anything that it's not desirable to do, but it needs done. And so to serve is to do it, and to disregard a status as a part of our decision over whether we would do the thing. Other comments on this?
I I am curious about, he's alluding to the fact that Judas is not clean.
Comes up, it's like right there together,
Yeah,
right?
it is. But in cleaning Judas's feet, does that absolve him at all, or does that just make him like worse off,
Yeah.
Um, is he the one that, you've got this comic relief with um Peter here, like wash everything, and really it's Judas that needs to have everything washed in
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think of Judas, did he sit there and just like, receive his foot washing the whole time, making his plans? I sort of wonder if Judas didn't really understand his betrayal and exactly how I don't think things went the way Judas thought they were going to go.
How
I don't
is
want
that?
to minimize his guilt in the matter, but I think he had a different vision for the way things would go than the way they did go.
Well, even so, like, I don't know that he would have given himself up by saying, "Oh, I'm going to be the one that betrays you, so you can't wash my feet."
Right, right,
Right?
very,
He's
yeah,
not gonna, he's just gonna blend in, right? He's just gonna, I think, sit
He
there and
didn't run
accept,
off to the restroom like, I'll be right back.
maybe.
you guys go ahead.
Right.
We honestly don't know. I mean, so
Yeah.
it's
We
like,
don't. We don't. We get so little of the information we really want about all these people. Like we want the inner monologue. We don't have it. Yeah. Yeah.
I've
Well,
always
let's.
had a little bit of sorrow for Judas,
Yeah.
just in that, here's somebody that did drop everything to follow Jesus. And I don't know if it's because of prophecy, or the prophecy is it because he's going to do it. Like, it doesn't happen without Judas's betrayal.
Yeah.
And
I
so what is
So I think that however the prophecy interacts with the action, that Judas had real free will and exercised it. But I think, yeah, I'm not sure he thought he was doing what he ended up doing. And I do feel kind of sorry for him. I'm not sure John does, though, right? John is pretty strong. I don't think John has a lot of,
He's got opinions.
yeah, he's like Satan right there. So yeah. All right, I'm going to read 18 through 32 since we're kind of running short on time. Um, so Jesus has given yet another discipleship passage, right? If you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. Verse 18, I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones who I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. From now on, I'm telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am. Your translations will add he. He is added by the translator. It's really just I am. This is one of those I am statements of Jesus. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. When Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit, and he testified and said, truly, truly, I say to you that one of you will betray me. And the disciples began looking at one another, at a loss to know of which one he was speaking. And there was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, tell us who it is of whom he's speaking. And he, the disciple whom Jesus loved, we're going to say John somebody, John the elder, or John the apostle, he, leaning back on Jesus' bosom, said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus then answered, that is the one for whom I shall dip the morsel and give it to him. So when he had dipped the morsel, he took it and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Now none of those who were reclining at the table knew for what purpose Jesus had said this to Judas. For some were supposing, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, buy the things we have need of for the feast, or else that he should give something to the poor. They didn't know. So after receiving the morsel, Judas went out immediately, and it was night. We get John's lighting notes, right? The darkness, that feel of darkness, ominous. And it was night. Therefore, when he had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him immediately. Okay, we're going to stop there for today's lesson. You'll notice that, like, just as soon as Jesus' service happens, he turns to the subject of betrayal. And what does Jesus say will happen? So let's start with verse 18. What's going to happen in the way Jesus says it there?
The scripture would be fulfilled.
Yeah, scripture will be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. What is Jesus talking about?
Sounds like he's getting prepared to squish him like a bug.
Yeah, there's that sense, like a crushing under the heel, a kick in the teeth. You could get that. You notice, like, we look at this and we go like, oh, that's Judas. And I think that's right. But in that passage, notice it's right in the middle of the discipleship passages, right? This is a thing that happens. It's not just Judas.
Mm-hmm.
People who eat with us sometimes betray us. There are people who are close to us that sometimes lift up their heel against us. And he's telling them for a couple of reasons. What are Jesus's reasons for telling them in verse 19 and 20?
So that they'll know it's him, that they'll know that the scripture is being fulfilled.
Yeah, so Jesus I think it would be a lot to believe that the God of the universe just let himself be betrayed by a regular guy so that he ends up being humiliated and executed by a human regime. Would that happen if you were really the God of the universe? It doesn't seem very likely. And so Jesus is filling in that this is actually a part of the plan. They need to know that, right? They need to know that Jesus is still the great I am, and that when this betrayal happens, it's not because the plan has gone wrong. It's really actually a part of the plan, and he's letting them know. And that just, it's just as improbable as the God of the universe putting on the apron and going to do the dirty job that no one else, everyone else in the room was too important to do. It's the same pattern, isn't it? The Jesus who would do the service is the same Jesus who will serve by being betrayed, by allowing a human being to betray him. And the nature of Jesus to be humble, to do the lowly task, to be betrayed, to have the very person who eats with him kick him down, he is letting them know this is actually the way. It's not a departure from the way, it's the actual path.
It
Um,
seems here like he's talking to multiples. I mean, yes, there's Judas, but you've got Peter who's gonna, you know, pretend like he doesn't know him 3 times. All the disciples, when he gets taken, they all disperse and they hide and they don't come to help him. I mean, he's talking like, yeah, when push comes to shove, I'm going to go to this. And there's a ton of you that are going to be MIA and just out for yourselves in that moment.
yeah, yeah. So they need to know this for their own, it's maybe denial or abandonment as well. Yeah, that this is part that Jesus is still doing what he means to do on their side. And then as disciples, I mean, they're going to live through some betrayals themselves, and they need to expect to follow where Jesus goes, right? Um, truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whoever I send receives me. But do people receive Jesus well all the time? No. And so many of them will not be received well also. The discipleship path will be one that will experience betrayal in the same way. Other questions or comments on this?
Not knowing the end of the story, this passage up until the point where Judas leaves is super innocuous. There's nothing. I mean, someone's going to betray me. It's going to raise his heel against me. Blah blah blah. It. There's like, who's going to do that? And they have no. There's no. We know the end of the story, but there's no concept of what it means. It just means someone's going to betray me. It's like, oh, are they going to steal something from you? Are they going to say bad things about you? There's
Yeah. Are they
nothing,
going to leave and quit following you?
there's nothing serious and looming. I mean, even when Judas left, they're like, they had no idea why Jesus said that to him. He just,
Right. Yeah. Is he going to go buy stuff? Is he going to go donate stuff?
I mean, they were probably, it's like, why is he kind of ruining the mood? That took a weird
Yeah.
turn. Okay, whatever. And then,
The whole thing, it was a weird night. First the rabbi was doing the servant job, and then there was this talk of betrayal, but we didn't know what it meant. And yeah, I do think they and John says several times like they wouldn't understand until later this thing, and they wouldn't understand until later that thing. Yeah, and so definitely like this, like Jesus is teaching them like, okay, you should expect betrayal both towards me and towards yourself. long before they're experiencing the actual stakes, right? The pain and the
Everything he said is it basically it's come down to there's some bad stuff, but it's all to glorify God. You know,
yeah,
everything is
yeah,
so I will be glorified, so God will be glorified, so I will be glorified. It's like, then it's almost like they might be expecting something fantastic and cool because a death is not glorified, but how many times in just the passages we read tonight does he say that?
yeah,
I've been
yeah,
glorified over and over. I mean, they heard the thunder, all the glorified, everything is about being glorified here, and
yeah.
that
And it
thing was probably like, oh, maybe he's just not gonna praise.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is kind of the dramatic irony of John all the way through that every time Jesus uses he's talking about his death whenever he says he's going to be glorified. And that's not how we think of glorified. And probably it's not how I think you have a great point. That's probably not how they thought of glorified either. But when we see the word glorified, what we know is that means yes, there's praise in it, but it is praise that reveals the true nature of God. And here we see the revelation that the true nature of God is to allow himself to be betrayed even unto death, right? God's humility is revealed, and that's how God is glorified. Like that in the cross, Jesus offers his own life in self-giving love. Like that tells us the truth about who God is more than anything else could ever do. And that's why this is glorified. I don't think they know it yet. I think you're exactly right. But John, the book, John's testimony that he writes later in life, is really structured to show that to us. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this is really far off base, but it's a good parallel. But in 26, where Jesus says, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. He's done that for all of us. So I don't think that's missed on John when he recognizes that we all sin against God, and that Jesus has done what he's done out of love to
Yeah.
cover that. So I just saw
Absolutely.
a very global.
Absolutely. And I think this is the exact answer to the why it is that every time Jesus starts talking about his doing the washing the disciples' feet or what he's going to do, that the thought turns to betrayal. This is the connection, right? This is how God shows us the full extent of his love is by all of it, right? The very kind of betrayal that Judas executes here it's the same category as the betrayal of every person when we sin. This is why we need the cross. This is why we need Jesus' sacrifice, is because of the betrayal of mankind as a whole and us, each one of us individually. This is what we need from Jesus, and this is how he shows the full extent of his love. So absolutely. Jesus committed to this path of the cross when he waited for Lazarus's death and then returned to Jerusalem. He showed his love in this lowly service. He is showing his love in the eventual event of the cross, and all the way through this reveals who God is, and that's glory. That's what is glorifying to God. Well, thank you so much. Great discussion tonight. I really enjoyed it. We ran a little over. Sorry about that. Thank you for being here. Um, After this scene, we're into the long teaching section. So we're really going to do chapters 15 and a little of 16 next week as kind of the representative lesson on these teaching sections. So it will be Jesus, the true vine, same time next week. Thanks, everyone.